Today I'm doing an audio essay on Grand Theft Auto 4. Normally I would do a full review of the game, but for games that I don't feel that strongly about, or for games that I just don't currently feel like I'm ready to cover in a full review, I'll do audio essays to talk about them instead. These aren't super edited in terms of their visual aspects, since the focus is more on the audio, so really if you want, you could listen to this video as if it was a miniature podcast while doing other stuff. I don't know. Let's get into it. As always, there's a spoiler alert I have to issue. This video will be specifically discussing the stories of Grand Theft Auto 3 and Grand Theft Auto 4, but will also mention aspects of the other GTA games. As a result, I'm warning you to click away from the video now if you want to avoid being spoiled on Grand Theft Auto 3, Vice City, San Andreas, Liberty City Stories, Vice City Stories 4, and 5, as there's a good chance that all of these may be spoiled, so yeah. Grand Theft Auto 4 was developed by Rockstar North and released on April 29, 2008, and it was a very noticeable shift away from what the previous titles of the 6th generation had set out to do. Yet again, players were put into Liberty City, except this time it's a completely different city than the one that we saw in Grand Theft Auto 3. For the first time in the series, we play as a Serbian immigrant named Niko Bellic, as he arrives by boat in the United States, seeking out the American dream. Niko has had a very difficult life, as Ray Bulgarin believes that Niko robbed him and wants him dead. His cousin Roman is in debt to Russian mobsters, and most significantly to him as a person himself, Niko wants to find out who was responsible for betraying his squad in the Yugoslavian War. Naturally, GTA 4 takes things in a far darker, more tragic direction than any other entry in the series. Vice City featured a sociopathic murderer named Tommy Vercetti building up a criminal empire in the vein of what Tony Montana did in Scarface, while San Andreas, from what I've heard, goes all in with craziness, and Liberty City Stories and Vice City Stories go all in for fun as well. But GTA 4 is not into that at all when it comes to its own tone. With the style and flair of those earlier titles, old school GTA seems to live by the motto, "Damn, it feels good to be a gangsta." GTA 4 responds to that by having a typical Grand Theft Auto style plot play out, but deconstructs it by having every aspect of that plot lead to realistic, logical, and oftentimes tragic consequences, ultimately leaving you with the idea that in all reality, no, it's pretty awful to be a gangsta. But perhaps I'm getting ahead of myself. I've deliberately avoided mentioning Grand Theft Auto 3 thus far because I want to explore just a theory of sorts that I have that I was thinking about as I played Grand Theft Auto 4. If you look at the plots of 3 and 4, you'll notice that there's a lot of parallels between them, except that Grand Theft Auto 4 goes all the way and deconstructs a lot of these aspects. 4 occasionally gives you some choices to make in missions, but we'll get to that when it's relevant. And there's also a lot of side characters and side content in 4 that I will not be discussing in this video, though one of them, Kate McCreary, is a love interest relevant to the ending of 4, but a lot of them otherwise don't really play much of a part in the story, and thus I'm not going to go into detail. In other words, I pose to you, the viewer, that in my interpretation, Grand Theft Auto 4 most specifically serves as a deconstruction of Grand Theft Auto 3. A deconstruction, for the purposes of this video, is essentially taking the tropes, conventions, and other aspects of a work and playing them entirely straight with real-life consequences. In a way, taking the work on its own terms even more seriously than the work itself does. Are we clear? I hope so, but just in case you're not, I will be linking to the TV Tropes page for deconstruction, and you can read up more on it there. GTA 3 and GTA 4 both open up with our protagonist being symbolically freed from their shackles and given another chance, as Claude is able to escape from a prison bus along with 8-Ball via an attack by the Colombian cartel after having been caught due to Catalina, his girlfriend, betraying him at the scene of a bank robbery and leaving with an unnamed Colombian individual, while Niko arrives in Liberty City after several months aboard the Platypus with immigrants from all over Europe who are seeking out a new life and hoping to escape from the struggles of their lives in the old country, with Colombian and Russian outfits being notable obstacles within the stories of Claude and Niko respectively. Notably, both characters have revenge as a major motive for why they do what they do within their respective stories, as Claude wants to get revenge on Catalina, while Nico wants to find out who was responsible for selling out his group in the war, knowing that there are 3 survivors including himself, and trying to find the other 2. Both men start from nothing in a very unforgiving city. Starting off, Claude gets access to 8-Ball's small safe house with a 1-car garage and access to a baseball bat, but not a whole lot else, while Nico has Roman's apartment and a parking space. In a way, 8-Ball and Roman serve somewhat similar roles, although 8-Ball is only relevant at the beginning of the game. 8-Ball gets Claude going in Liberty's underworld by introducing him to a pimp named Luigi Gottarelli, which allows Claude to work for the Leone crime family and begin his ascension, while Roman causes Nico to unwittingly dive into the criminal underworld because Nico has to defend him and try and deal with his debts that he's accrued through gambling. GTA 3 sets Claude out for vengeance, while Nico in Grand Theft Auto 4 only really gets into the criminal world because he has to do it to protect his cousin. Claude rises up in the Leone family by working for Luigi, Tony Cipriani, Joey Leone, and ultimately Don Salvatore Leone. While starting off, Nico works for Roman's taxi service, which introduces us to Little Jacob and Michelle, 2 notable supporting characters, before having to work for Vlad, who is Roman's loan shark, in an attempt to help Roman out. During Claude's work for the Leone family, Catalina and the Colombian cartel start working on a scheme involving a drug called Spank, and this establishes that they will remain important throughout the story. Claude ends up being pitted against the Leone family when Salvatore's wife, Maria, lies about having an affair with Claude. When this happens, Claude and Maria have to flee from Portland Island to go to Staunton Island, which causes Claude's ascension to continue when he ends up working for Asuka Kaisen and the Yakuza, leading to him assassinating Salvatore and him being permanently cut off from the Leone family. In GTA 4, however, Vlad is sleeping with Roman's girlfriend Mallory, and Nico opts to put down Vlad with a bullet to the dome. What ends up happening is that they get kidnapped, and Nico ends up being employed by Mikhail Faustin, a psychopath and the criminal boss of Dmitry Raskolov. Faustin has Nico kill the son of Kenny Petrovic, one of the most powerful criminals, and in order to prevent a gang war, Dmitry brokers a deal that, as long as Nico is the man to assassinate Faustin, since Nico was just a hired gun doing what he was told to do, Petrovic will not start a war. When Nico does kill Faustin, he ends up being betrayed when Dmitry brings Bulgarin and a group of gunmen to try to kill him and Little Jacob, and when Nico escapes, he and Roman are forced to flee when Dimitri's men torch the cab depot and the apartment, leading them to move into Mallory's apartment in Bohan. I just want to establish right now that Mallory and Roman's relationship ends with a wedding right at the end of the game. Since it's not super relevant in the grander scheme of things, I'm going to mention it just here as an aside. Already, we can see the deconstruction taking place in the context of the 2 games' beginning acts. GTA 3 sets a mute Claude off to work for the Leones, climbing up the ladder until Maria sours their relationship with the family. But in a rather fantastical way, when Claude gets to Staunton, things work themselves out rather well for him, as working for the Yakuza allows him to just kill off his previous employer, and the Leones just disappear at that point for the most part. It's also interesting that Salvatore opts to turn with such little reason, but given his own story arc throughout the 3D universe era of the series, it's little wonder why he's so paranoid. 4, on the other hand, goes really realistic, as Nico in the opening section starts off working for a cab service before pissing off Roman's loan shark, forcing him into working for that loan shark. And when things sour between Nico and Vlad, Nico ends up working for Faustin, but naturally, being a psychopath, Faustin's orders nearly cause a gang war, and I find it pretty believable that gangs would have to broker an assassination deal to stop somebody like that from ruining the balance of power. And, thus far, when Nico gets booted out of the first area, Nico is set to be much worse off than he was before. Claude is better off in Staunton Island, with a nearby hospital, close proximity to Asuka, a nearby ammunition to purchase gear from, and an overall better safe house set in a central location near everything, while Nico and Roman have lost everything and angered Dmitry and the Russian mob. It's kind of an interesting thing to me. Previous protagonists of the series were often very evil sociopaths who only looked good because of their antagonists that they were fighting against being even worse than them. While thus far, Nico seems very human and tortured and sympathetic, and yet, with him trying to do the right thing, he ends up screwing himself over and digging himself and Roman into a deeper hole. Let's continue. On Staunton Island, Claude ends up diving even deeper into Liberty's criminal underworld, working with a corrupt detective named Ray Machowski and eventually helping him escape to Vice City. He also works with media mogul Donald Love. Now I know what you may be thinking. Save it. I am not going down that rabbit hole. That ain't what I'm here to do. Love has Claude help orchestrate a war between the Yakuza and the cartel by killing Asuka's brother Kenji in order to lower real estate prices. Because, as his mentor Avery Carrington taught him back in the 80s, nothing drives down real estate prices like a good old-fashioned gang war. Love also gets Claude to rescue the old man from the prison break earlier. And finally, Claude manages to confront Catalina for the first time so far. She escapes, but Asuka is able to capture her partner, a Colombian named Miguel, believing that he may know something about Kenji's demise. We'll cut off here to go back to GTA 4 now. Bohan does not treat Nico and Roman well at all. Dimitri's men abduct Roman and bring him to a warehouse, but Nico is able to rescue him. Another job ends with Nico being double-crossed by Michelle, who actually turns out to be a government agent that works for a company only known under the name of its front, the United Liberty Company, forcing him into killing known or suspected terrorists in exchange for information on the guy who betrayed his unit and the file on his crimes. Because obviously a criminal would have a file, and it would need to be dealt with in order to avoid bigger repercussions later on. Nico ultimately finds the other two survivors from his unit. Florian Kravik, a gay man who prefers to be called by the name Bernie Crane and is pretty much completely harmless, and Darko Breivik, who was indeed responsible for the betrayal. The game gives you the choice when you confront him to kill or spare him. I like to be the good guy throughout the game and let people live whenever I was allowed to do so and still complete a mission, but Darko was the exception. Considering the really dark stuff Nico experienced in the dark world that Nico had to dive into to get to this point, I figured he deserved to kill this one guy, and that more or less concludes Act 2. Thus far, the deconstruction is going pretty deep. Claude is a bad guy, although I will admit that since Claude is mute and GTA 3's storytelling is very underdeveloped due to it being one of the earliest video games of its kind, that's largely just my own interpretation, but bear with me. Claude's just a silent sociopath, but he's still continuing onward and upward in the criminal underworld, growing even more powerful with every passing job. It's particularly interesting to me that both Grand Theft Auto 3 and Grand Theft Auto 4 feature corrupt law enforcement, but then that's a classic convention of Rockstar video games, as we witness that in Grand Theft Auto 3, San Andreas, 4, Red Dead Redemption, and GTA 5. Nonetheless, it's still a clever deconstruction as seen in GTA 4. Firstly, because Nico's crimes have given the paper a means to extort him. What would you do in this situation? Go to prison for probably several decades over your crimes, or work with a government agency to hopefully find out where the traitor is and get yourself out of trouble? Yeah, I'm pretty sure you'd work with them too. The thing is, though, the agency isn't much better than Nico. If anything, they're even worse. They send Nico to gun down terrorists or suspected terrorists. Now, I definitely get killing confirmed terrorists, but things get a little bit questionable to me when an agency extorts a gunman into murdering people who are suspected to be terrorists without actually allowing those individuals to have the benefit of the doubt or due process in a court of law first. Darko is an interesting character as well, as he's the man who sold out Nico's unit all those years ago, and notably, he's designed as a darker counterpart to Nico. The two look pretty similar, they served together in the military, and they even have fairly similar names. And in a twisted way, Darko even had a similar motive of revenge, citing the killings of his friends and neighbors as the reason for his betrayal. An interesting dialogue exchange between Nico and Darko sheds light on the interesting dynamic that criminal-centric stories like the Grand Theft Auto games have. Nico asks how much it took for Darko to do it, and Darko simply responds with 1,000. When Nico questions this, Darko makes a pretty good point by asking him, "How much do you charge to kill someone?" The fact is, a lot of these types of stories go for a very gray, ambiguous form of morality that, if you'll pardon the Eminem reference, can be summed up pretty well as bad meets evil. And this exchange may be the very best example of this for Grand Theft Auto 4 as a whole. Nico tries to consider himself as being a better man than Darko, but at the end of the day, whether he likes it or not, Nico Bellic is ultimately just a common criminal who works for whoever will pay him. Now it's time for our wrap-up. Shoreside Vale, GTA 3's final island, has Asuka and Maria send Claude against the Colombians as the war between the Yakuza and the cartel escalates, eventually leading to Catalina murdering Asuka and Miguel and kidnapping Maria, demanding a $500,000 ransom. And the game concludes with Claude fighting his way through the Colombians, rescuing Maria, and when Catalina attempts to use a helicopter to escape, Claude finally exacts his revenge by blowing it up. Claude leaves with Maria, with her briefly talking to him before the screen cuts to black, with a gunshot followed by dead silence, leaving the ending up to much interpretation. Me personally, I imagine that Claude would be the type to kill her, just to have full control over Liberty City with no loose ends. Grand Theft Auto 4's final act has Jimmy Pecorino summon Nico for aid in a lucrative heroin deal. The catch? The deal, if Nico goes along with it, will force him into working with Dimitri, who has already proven to be questionable and untrustworthy. He's left with a very sadistic choice: sell out his own values in the name of money, or stay true to himself by getting revenge on Dimitri. We'll briefly cover the deal ending, but I'm more familiar with and more interested in the revenge ending. In the deal ending, Dimitri double-crosses Nico and takes the heroin for himself. Roman's wedding ends up with Roman unintentionally being killed by an assassin hired by Dimitri, and after Dimitri guns down Pecorino, Nico then guns down Dimitri to avenge his cousin. It's tragic stuff. The revenge ending has Nico go to the Platypus, the very boat that he arrived on at the start of the game, to get revenge on Dimitri. At Roman's wedding, Pecorino commits a drive-by shooting, murdering Kate, Nico's love interest, because of Nico screwing him out of the heroin deal. Nico, backed up by Roman and Little Jacob, assaults Pecorino in a grand final mission involving lots of gunfighting, Nico jumping a motorbike off a ramp to enter a chopper in midair, and some other cool moments before finally Nico gets his revenge on Pecorino, and that's the end. As I've hopefully established, yet again, Grand Theft Auto 4 takes aspects from 3 and deconstructs them. Grand Theft Auto 3 closed out with two of Claude's biggest allies dead, Maria's fate ambiguous, and Claude at the top of the food chain in Liberty City's criminal landscape, after somehow having defied all of the odds and, in classic Grand Theft Auto form, killing off several criminal outfits and defeating his enemy more or less by himself. He's the king, with nothing to really be worried about at this point. Nico, on the other hand, seems to have very little to show for all of his trouble. Throughout the game, Nico, much like Claude, gets himself into a lot of trouble with the various criminal outfits in Liberty City, leading to many people around him, including his love interest or cousin depending on his choices, dead. Killing Vlad gets him into a far worse situation that leads to him getting stuck helping a government agency under the threat of being arrested otherwise, while many of the criminal bosses he works for are overly paranoid and treasonous, and due to him constantly working for so many different people, Nico is never truly able to actually rise through the ranks of any specific organization. He befriends the McCreary crime family, Little Jacob, Jacob's friend Badman, and some other interesting side characters, but many of the people that Nico works for either get killed or arrested. Grand Theft Auto 3 seems to paint a picture of a dark criminal underworld that one could potentially climb the ranks of if they've got good skills with a gun and a decent work ethic, and it ends with Claude definitely being better off at the ending than he was when the game began. On the other hand, Nico has been corrupted in some deep, profound way, being dragged into the world of crime, and having had to go through so much tragedy and bloodshed, only to ultimately still be just a small fish in a big pond. GTA 4 definitely does not go for the classic damn it feels good to be a gangsta mentality of the 3D universe Grand Theft Auto titles. If anything, Grand Theft Auto 4 sadly says that this stuff isn't worth it at all. And realistically, it's not. You get into the world of crime, and you have an absurdly high chance of being ratted out, betrayed, assassinated, extorted, or arrested, and the people that you love and care about will be at an immense risk of danger or even death as a result. It feels pretty bad, and it's ultimately pretty pointless to be a gangsta. And if anything, Nico has learned that the American dream is just that for many people. A dream. Well, this has been something pretty unusual for the channel. I hope you've enjoyed this audio essay filled with my musings on two great Grand Theft Auto games. If you did, please like, share, comment, and subscribe if you want, because there's more where that came from. And if you didn't like it, then please feel free to tell me in the comments section how I'm an overly analytical cretin douchebag who has no idea what he's talking about. Until next time, this is Arthur Wonderfluff, signing out.
What you